computer. All righty, here goes. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. Joining me today on this special Make Me Wanna Holler episodes, all things Black people, the Black diaspora from Turtle Island to Brixton and elsewhere, and our all things England UK edition is Jackie Walker, a longtime social racial justice activist, anti-imperialist, anti-war activist, an author, a retired young children's teacher, a Jewish anti-Zionist campaigner. She co-founded Momentum, a pro-Corbyn socialist Labor Party organization. She is co-host and co-founder of Redline TV, which folks should check out and become a Patreon to and donate generously. She's also a returning champion. She was one of my first guests and also one of my first subjects when I started in the independent grassroots journalism, and she is my guest for the hour. So, firstly, Jackie, thank you so much for coming back on the program. And I know it's late, but happy Black History Month to the black to black fellas in the UK.
yeah. God, when you talk about me like that, I'm actually impressed. I want to meet this person quick.
Folks, I also forgot to mention that she was also a co-founder of Labor Against the Witch Hunts, when so many people from the Labor Party, including Jewish anti-Zionist voices, but also very moderate Palestine solidarity voices, were all slandered as anti-Semites, and even people who even were very careful in their language and would never ever call out Zionism or anything like that. Comrade Chris Williamson were also slandered and kicked out of the Labor Party. So Labor Against the Witch Hunt was in response to that. And now I think everybody's kicked. Actually, you know what? Before we talk about, Black history in Britain and the struggles of Black people in Britain, I think we have to actually return to the very thorny subject of Israel Palestine so because isn't everyone more or less exiled and kicked out of the Labor Party that's left-leaning, that's anti-imperialist, that is anti-Zionist, that is, a member of Palestine Solidarity, but just in general, anyone that has a left-wing bone in their body, some at a default who are too much focusing on socialism at home and not anti-imperialism abroad. But I think more or less all of them have been purged from the Labor Party, except for a few except for a few people in union leaderships, right?
Yeah, of course. We're all anti-Semites now. It's the fashionable thing. And I have to say that I was one of the first there. But, I tend to do that. I was a trailblazer. I think, although Tony Greenstein sometimes will say he is, but he's not. But I just let him get away with it. I think I was the first Jewish person to have the finger pointed at to be an anti-Semite. I'm certainly the first Black and Jewish person, but and another thing I'm pretty sure about is I'm the first person who started a campaign and who saw exactly where this was leading us, because actually, none of this is about race. If it was about race, you wouldn't be getting people who've been known as anti-racist, not just in their practice, but in their campaigning. You wouldn't get them being called anti-Semites if that was true. No, this has always been about two very important things, and they're linked, of course, and that's power and that's Palestine.
Exactly. And Jeremy Corbyn, a guy who if he was to give anyone his CV, why he should be, part of this political party or this left-wing organization, on paper, he had, one of the best, social justice records and one of the best anti-imperialist records, as well as Palestine solidarity stuff. And now, so I have to ask briefly, if it's even possible, what are your reflections on the fact that Jeremy Corbyn himself also kicked out of the Labour Party, but we see this latest genocidal assault that Israel is doing on the people of Gaza, as well as the West Bank, and of course everybody in Lebanon and Iran is on eggshells. Are we going to be, are we going to be next? Is World War III going to finally escalate to another level. It's been impressive to see the global solidarity protests for Palestine, but especially, I have to say this, especially in the West, from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, France, Germany, even Belgium, which tends to be very apathetic on international affairs and even domestic racism. There's been Palestine solidarity events, and your comrades have been defying the media, no matter how many times they keep slandering our comrades as anti-Semites, Hamas supporters, terrorist lovers, and stuff like that. But people have been defying that, regardless of the smears from the National Post, the Daily Mail, CNN, the BBC, all the usual suspects. So I'm curious. I'm curious. What are your thoughts on that? Because these are the biggest Palestine solidarity events and some of the largest people power protests since pre-invasion of Iraq and so forth.
Look, I don't know what's happening in all those countries, so I can't talk about what's happening in Belgium or Australia, etc., 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 or what has happened. I'm not going to pretend that I'm that kind of political expert, but I have a kind of foot in both camps in terms of the States and the UK, because I'm actually a dual national. I was born in the States. I have an American passport.
Yeah.
And much of my family are in the States, as are much of my family are in Israel at the moment. And that's really my perspective. And I would say, if I'm talking about why this is happening, why you're getting, we had certainly between 750,000 or 1 million people out on the streets. And this is a march which is almost being called on a weekly basis, and people are dropping what they're doing, and they're defying the fact that they are being called by the way, they're all anti-Semites. That means there's 1 million anti-Semites on the streets of London every week. The fact that they happen to be one of the most diverse, protests that you could see, never mind, it just proves that they're anti-Semites, of course, if you're talking to the pro-Zionist lobby. But why has it been happening? Well, and I do think there are echoes in America. I think if you have got a society where it has become just so blatantly obvious that an accusation of anti-Semitism is too often used for political ends, I think people are beginning to suss that. I think they're beginning to see it. And I think they learned a lot through the Corbyn years, But I also think something else has happened. And each time we've seen these disgusting maneuvers by Israel, it's become more and more difficult for them to tell their lies, because we've got people on the ground and we're seeing it. The fact that today they went into a hospital, made all men below the age of, I think, 60 or 65, strip down to their underpants and go into the courtyard with their hands up. So what you've got to imagine here is, maybe you've got your daughter who's injured, or your wife, or your brother. Under armed guard, you're doing that. This is in a hospital, this is happening. And that the IDF are going around interrogating, they're using the word interviewing or talking to, they're interrogating people who've been injured by bombs, who are sick, and this is happening in a hospital. Now, any other country, I mean, they're right, Israel is a very special case, because any other country doing this would be up in The Hague for war crimes, quick as you could spit. And that's the actual truth of it. Now, some people say to me, I'm sorry if I'm going off piste here, but it's what's on my mind. Some people are saying, oh, well, look, Hamas, they say. Hamas, they've got tunnels underneath. Well, actually, Hamas
or they use, or they say that the only reason why Israel is targeting hospitals and education centers is because Hamas is shooting at them from there, and ergo,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
the human
Whatever,
shields.
whatever. This thing. Well, first of all, is there are tunnels underneath the whole of Gaza. Many of those were actually instituted by Israel. Just look at the articles. You can see that for their own reasons, they built some of those tunnels. But let's say, apart from that, let's just dismiss the rubbish that you've got rockets being fired from the hospital. I think if you did have, some journalists just might have seen a rocket being fired from a hospital. Just let's say you've got tunnels going underneath the hospitals. Just let's say you have. So what? So absolutely what? What army, what international law gives you the right to bomb to death people who have a hospital on top of those tunnels? There's none. There's none at all. And actually, what we see is that, say, for example, today, Macron has had to move. He's had to move his position. And that's because of the power of the people. He was over there. Now he's over here because even though he banned the marches, people were coming out in their millions.
Same with Germany. Same with Germany. They also they also said that there's a ban on these hate marches and on saying from the marches say Palestine will be free. And the German Palestine solidarity public has only just doubled down and tripled their.
But what you've got to understand is that they are actually, the thing that really scares them is that, look, it's not that they control the media. It's not that the establishment control the media. They are the bloody media. They don't need to control it. They sleep with each other. They go out to dinner with each other. They've been to the same schools, for God's sake. The media in these countries are the establishment. Okay? So this disparity between, I don't call them our leaders, I call them our rulers, because that's what they are. There's an increasing gap in this. And it's not just about the issue of Palestine. There's all sorts of policy issues where the gap between our rulers and the people in general is getting wider and wider. And they can't simply ignore it, which is why everybody's got to be out there on the bloody streets. Don't matter what you're planning to do. Have a drink after the march. It's a great atmosphere. Just do it like that. So what's really interesting, and I'm sure you'll feel like this, is that the fact that this isn't just happening in the UK or in America. This is a global uprising, and it's not got a leadership. There aren't people who are our rulers are not supporting this. What you'll get certainly in the UK is that you'll suddenly get a protest erupting at Euston, or you'll get a protest happening in Trafalgar Square. This has got nothing to do with what we used to call our leaders. It's got nothing to do. And that is two things. It's powerful and it's scary. Because actually,
go ahead.
What you're proving to people, and this is what's going to have ramifications in the future, is that there is actually power with the people.
One quick follow-up question before we get on to the other topic I wanted to talk to you about is I have to ask this, which is okay, we've gotten 1 million, maybe 10 million or more on the streets in places in England, and not just London, but across Canada, across the United States, even in very, very right-wing states like Texas. France people are defying what Macron is saying. In Germany, people are and as you mentioned, across diverse backgrounds, German anti-Zionist Jews, Germans of a Palestinian background and of a Middle Eastern background and of all backgrounds. Why is it then that we can't make something like Palestine an electoral issue where we can punish a party like the Labour Party, the SPD in Canada, the NDP, or the Liberal, or the Liberal Party of Canada, when they, when they say, we stand by Israel and all of you Palestinian voices, even though you have legitimate grievances, you need to shut the beep up and just go away into your own, into the corners you came from.
Okay, so I can't answer for other countries because I don't know enough about, everybody's got a different electoral system. Everybody's constituencies are different. So I'm going to tell you the reason for that, for what's going to happen in the UK. Now, the Labour Party are going to get in. There's no doubt in my mind that if I was a betting person, and I only bet people in my own family because, I can then coerce the money out of them. If I was a betting person, I would happily bet that Starmer and the Labour Party will be the next government. Okay, but, and here is the but, and this is how our system works. We've got a first past the post system. So we don't have proportional representation. We have a system whereby the way our democracy is supposed to work, it doesn't work like this anymore, is that local parties decide who's going to be the MP. And that's how local, if you like, local democracy is linked to the executive in Parliament. It doesn't work like that anymore. It's broken down because our rulers didn't think it gave them enough power. You got a lot of very unhappy, politically motivated people on the ground. We've also got a system in terms of constituencies. So each constituency will elect an MP to represent them within the House of Parliament. But not all constituencies are the same, obviously. Again, I remind people there's no proportional representation. So for example, I mean, I think London should secede from the rest of of England. I've got nothing to do
I think a bunch of our friends in the North and the Midlands would be more than happy if London, especially the city of London, was to secede.
Well, no, remember the city of London has got nothing to do with the electorate of London. The London in itself is one of the most diverse cities in the world, as you know. I'm sitting here. I am literally 6-7 minutes from London Bridge Station. And where I live, 50% what you would call non-Anglo-Saxon people, all living here quite happily. No, we're not shouting and screaming at each other. We have and are living here very comfortably. Now, there's a number of constituencies, not so much where the black vote, and I'm going to say here now, this is going to get complicated, the black stroke Muslim stroke radical vote is the pivotal vote. In England, if you get one more vote than the next person, you win. That's it. You win. Now, from what I'm hearing, there are probably at least 15 constituencies that are having serious thoughts of now putting up candidates who I think might have a serious chance, if not of being elected, then certainly of displacing the Labour Party. But let's just say you've got 15 of those.
So that would be something like this new left-wing party, which I'm a big fan of, like the Breakthrough Party, or hypothetically the working class.
There's all sorts of different groupings going on. And, what's not going to happen is that you're not going to get one whole party taking on that role. So Newham will have another scene. What's happening in Liverpool is a very different scene. What's happening in London is a very different scene. In a way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And I think that's what that would be my message to people. If you're in Liverpool, then you should be voting this way. But, you wouldn't be voting that if you weren't in Liverpool. You might vote, if you're in Newham, you'd be voting something else. So what I think, when I'm being optimistic, what I see is just the potential. Say if what I'm saying is true, and in those 15 or so constituencies, they put up candidates, and just say, let's be really, really conservative. Just let's say maybe 2 or 3 of them get in, right? On top of that, maybe another handful stop the Labour person getting in. That little wedge in Parliament would be extraordinary to give that voice of independence a seat in our parliamentary system, because at the moment we are silenced. Now, I know as a fact that those discussions are happening as we speak. What's not going to happen, forget it. There is not going to be one alternative party, and there are reasons for that. They're not going to be one alternative party. Some people, say, for example, in my area, I don't think it's going to be like that. I think the alternative vote is going to be a Green vote. How much of a difference that's going to make, who knows? But in certain specific areas where independent parties have already seen a lot of local success, and that's in the, say, for example, the northeast of London, it's in Liverpool, it's places like that, I think they've got a lot to build on. For example, there's a comrade in Liverpool. She's Jewish, white Jewish. She's now standing for the Green Party. They did very well in the local elections. I think if she were to stand, there would be a lot of support from the people who are traditionally on the left. There would be. So I think what I'm saying is what's happening now and how the Palestine thing has affected us is that the left vote has become much more mobile and much less set into place. We're only going to vote this way or that way. I think no. I think more increasingly people on the left are looking at the Labour and Tory party and not saying they're all the same. I wouldn't say they're all the same, but I would say they're not different enough. And we need to actually, there is only one tool that we have, and that's our vote. They don't give a cuss about us unless we're not voting for them. So my message is, do not go and spoil your vote. Go and vote. People want to go and write dicks on their ballot. Don't do that. We all know what a dick looks like. We also know they're dicks, but don't do it, mate. Go and vote for who you think. So, for example, the Greens at the moment, their co-leader is a Jewish guy, and he is really quite pro-Palestinian. I think in a lot of places that's going to do them very well.
Fascinating, and this is why we need to have you back on as a regular, and we're going to return to that subject another we're definitely gonna have to return to that subject another day. And then before we talk about Black Britain, your response to Cruella de Vil, coward woman, I'm sorry, Suella Braver woman, her being sacked or her being demoted. She still is an MP though. And the return of David Cameron as foreign minister, the guy
who effing cares? This is all the games that they play. Yeah. First of all, I don't care about Cameron. It's so boring. The media class yesterday were wetting their knickers. They thought it was the best thing since Guy Fawkes. That Guy Fawkes, by the way, is the guy who tried to blow up Parliament.
But that being said, this was the guy though. This was the guy though who lit Libya on fire, who lit Syria on fire, who lit Ukraine. Who lit Ukraine on fire, and then he calls a referendum on on staying in the European Union.
Nobody really cares about that except a number of us on the left. The game that is being played here is Braverman. And she has put herself in a win-win situation. So if she gets sacked, she wins. Because there's a lot of far right and right who are going to really rally to her, because there's nothing they like so much as a fascist black woman. I mean, they love it up. I have to tell you a story.
Well, actually, fascist brown woman, because we don't like, she ain't black, she ain't black. That's the Indian diaspora, the South Asian diaspora. That's their.
Well, we can talk about that till the cows come home, but I can tell you, I'll tell you a little snippet story here. I was invited into the House of Lords because somebody decided they wanted to be really naughty. Anyway, I'm not going to tell you the whole story. And this is after I was suspended from the Labour Party for anti-Semitism. So I was going to have lunch with one of our duchesses who had invited me into the House of Lords. I thought, well, that's cool. I'm in for doing a bit of, eating and annoying them at the same time. And she said, I really want to introduce you to a couple of people. And she said, I'm not using his name. Stanley, come over here. Come and meet Jackie Walker. She was vice chair of Momentum. And, she's been suspended for anti-Semitism. Anyway, Lord Stanley, very nice chap, talked to me and said to me, she said, we don't have that nonsense in the Tory party. We wouldn't have all that nonsense. He said, have you actually thought of crossing the floor? He said, because I guarantee you, if you wanted to do this, we could make you an MP so quickly, your feet wouldn't touch the floor. Well, that was an offer. So you see what a cost it has been to stick to my principles. By now, I could have been like Suella or Cruella or whatever you want to call her. It doesn't matter. You may not see her as black, right? To most white people out there, she's black. It doesn't matter. To most white people out there, she is black. There is nothing they like better than a racist black person. They love them. And actually the Tory party is now full of them. There are more black racists now in the Tory party than in the Labour Party.
Oh my gosh, that is so true. That is so true. That is very, very true. There are lots of black Tory MPs now, even before Boris Johnson actually became prime minister. So what you're saying is true. But also the Labour Party, the black MPs of the Labour Party also aren't all of like the left spectrum. They're all, Blairites and
talking about my Uncle Lammy, my nice friend Uncle Lammy, as I call him.
Yes, yeah. Uncle Tom Lammy. The biggest, one of the biggest, bootlickers of corporatism.
Uncle Lammy will do and say whatever is necessary to get himself. He wants to be the first black leader of the Labour Party. And I'm afraid, what's her name? Oh, God.
And he might get it. And he might very well get it.
He has got the #1 chance of being the first black Labour Party leader.
Not Chaka Umuna?
No. He's out anyway. He's not an MP anymore. Not Clive Lewis. He's too maverick. No, Uncle Lammy. Uncle Lammy is the Labour Friends of Israel. Uncle Lammy does what he's told, but makes it sound punchy.
Exactly.
He's got that gravitas.
I still remember when our sometimes good friend George Galloway, when he was kicked out of the Labour Party and he had the Respect Party. One of the meanest persons to George on like BBC panel shows and so forth was yours truly, David Lammy. That's so when he came across as like, I'm this pro Corbyn guy, I said to myself, ooh, this is a snake that people are not going to realize that he's a snake until he really shows his fangs. So
yeah. I mean, it's full of them, isn't it? You know, they used to be called, and I'm going to be very polite here, which you'll be relieved for, all your viewers might be. Here's what we used to call in the good old days, and my family was also, my ancestors had a few of these, a house Negro. He was Negro.
So he's definitely, yeah, no, he's definitely not the highest order, and that's a perfect segue to talking about, Black people in Britain. So my first question I have to ask you is explain to a left-leaning audience, one, about the history of racism towards Black Britons and the many efforts to overcome institutional xenophobia, police brutality, discrimination in the housing, workplace, and education.
Oh, bloody hell, you'll have to have me on for a week and pay me a lot of money to do that. Are you joking me? I'm going to say it very, very quickly, and I'm just going to use my own experience. When I arrived on these sunny shores in 1959, aged 5, stepping off.
Generation, right?
Hmm?
Windrush generation, right?
In Russia, you know, they hate me, right? I have to tell you, because when you say Windrush generation, like this halo goes round your head, this is the white person's game. A halo goes around your head. The problem for them is I am one of the youngest of the Windrush generations. I'm never invited to any of their celebrations. I've never been bloody invited by the Archbishop of Canterbury. I wasn't invited when Fluella Benjamin, another well-known house person, you know, was invited to unveil the statue. They don't invite me for bloody obvious reasons, right? But in 10 years' time, actually, let's be clear here, in 20 years' time, because I'm intending to live till I'm 94. I'm nearly 70 now. I'm going to live till I'm 94, right? I am going to be the last fucking Windrush generation person alive. And let's see how that suits them. Anyway, I arrived on these shores and, you know, the racism was stark. It was every day in your face, including and especially in London. And it was hard. It was physical. It wasn't just, you know, oh, you're hurting my feelings. It was being spat at and beaten up. It was that kind of racism. It was living in continual squalor, whether that's metaphorical or a real material squalor. That's what it was. Now, things improved, and they improved for many reasons. A lot of those reasons were because of the efforts of people like my comrades and myself. And we fought very hard, and legislation was changed and education was changed. But also, and this is a really important thing, and I'm talking about London in particular, you should never underestimate the ability of ordinary people just to learn that the Black person next door is pretty much the same as them, right? And, you know, so I think that as well happened. You probably don't know, but I know it doesn't matter because I'm going to tell you. You know, I mean, like, particularly with the Caribbean community, something like 60% of the Caribbean community now marry, have relationships, have children with white people. Something like 50 years' time, there will be no definable African Caribbean population in London. They'll all be in the white population. Actually, this is not the first time that's happened. The same thing happened in the 18th century, but we've all forgotten about it. Yeah. So we thought we were going on this wonderful trajectory where we'd all be singing Kumbaya, right? Well, we got to the Kumbaya bit, and then they didn't like it and say they cut our legs off. And the whole nonsense with anti-Semitism is, now just let me see how I can put this. If you're really going to impose white supremacy and give it an ethical clothing, then what you do is that you put a white minority on the top of a racial hierarchy. And then you get a load of black people to do your nasty racist work for you. And then you can really see white racism red in tooth and claw. And that's
that being said, I have to ask them this question is when when many people from what's now called the Commonwealth anyways, the Commonwealth they're still colonies, but that's another topic for another day. But basically, when all of those colonies of the British Empire, it could be Jamaica, it could be Trinidad, it could be Nigeria, it could be Uganda, it could be South Africa, and so forth.
Yeah.
When those, immigrants, came to Britain, were many of them shocked at the fact that that they thought that this is England. We're going to be going into industrial paradise. We're going to be seeing countryside paradise. And were they just shocked at the extreme poverty, even without the bombs of Germany during Second World War? But were a lot of them very shocked at the Dickensian poverty that they saw?
Of course. I mean, my mother, although I was born in America, we actually came from Jamaica. This nice guy called Enoch Powell, have a look him up if anybody wants to know the roots of modern day white racism in the UK, particularly in the Tory party. This nice guy called Enoch Powell went to Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean to ask us to come and do the dirty work that white people didn't want to do. And of course, when we got here, my mum had a British passport. She wasn't an immigrant. As far as she was concerned, and as far as she was told, she was a British citizen. She came in on that. And the shock of not only finding the level of racism that was going on, not just that, but the material conditions, which were post-war quite appalling. I mean, it was, because there's poverty and poverty. We weren't rich in Jamaica, but, you can have very little money in a warm, beautiful country, and your quality of life can be really quite good. If you're living in England and you've got not much money, I mean, the quality of life is pretty appalling. So that's what
death sentence almost.
Sorry?
It's a death sentence almost. To be chronically unemployed or chronically in poverty, but the pay is shit, whether it's an industrial working class job or something like McDonald's, or jumping from internship to internship. When you're poor in Britain, it's really terrible to be poor.
That's right. I mean, Jamaica had this extraordinary life expectation. Even 50 years ago, you could expect to live as a poor person until you were 70 in Jamaica. You certainly wouldn't do that in the UK, and my mother, who died when I was 11, she died through poverty, and that poverty, I can't prove it, but I know that her poverty went alongside the racism that she was met with. So there's absolutely no doubt about that. But one thing is, of course, Black peoples, and I'm going to use the widest spread of the term, peoples of color in this country, if you look at the outcomes for people, and there's all sorts of variabilities, I know, and I know that if I say this, people will come in and go, oh yeah, but South Asians, or whatever. I understand there's plenty of variability, but on the whole, peoples of color do not do very well in virtually any sphere. Now, like I said, there are differences, but if you look certainly at the African Caribbean population, they die earlier, they live poorer, they die in childbirth more, more of their children are kept out of schools. All of that is true. Now, of course, that's complicated, and people will say to you, yeah, but those figures are not quite the same in the African communities. Well, of course they're bloody not, because they're not going through the trauma, the inherited trauma of having been an enslaved people. So what I'm saying is there's all sorts of complicated discussions to be had, and you're not paying me enough for me to explain this on and on. But basically, virtually all minorities share this profile of being excluded, poor, oppressed, generally. That is still going on. You're in prison more, you've got worse mental health outcomes. I can go on and on, but like I said, you're not paying me enough for this, so I'm not going to. So that's the state. But what we have now, which we didn't have, and which we still have, and which is a precious outcome of the years of struggle that people of my generation went through, is that we now have solidarity with white comrades. Not all, but there is some. When I came to this country,
interesting.
Let me just finish this. When I came to this country, it wasn't a Tory government, local council, that had a colour bar on council housing. It was a Labour council. It was a Labour council. So let's just be clear on how far we have moved. And I'm not saying the Labour white left. Listen, as you know, I'm the first critic of the Labour white left. But I think we also have to acknowledge that there is a comradeship somewhere there. There are attempts to find solidarity there, which 30 and 40 and 50 years ago, there wasn't.
We're going to return to what you just said about that, later in my questions. But then I have to ask this, which is, can you share any knowledge on this phenomena that took place during the 1970s, when there was still the Windrush generation, called farming, that took place in the UK, where you had a wave of adopted Black children into the UK? And explain, if you can, the series of uprisings against police brutality in Britain, or state terror, like in Brixton, and also the uprisings which was in response to an incident, a fire that was started at a party in the Black community was celebrating.
New crossfire. So I'm not going to use your jargon, because I don't recognize your jargon that you're using.
Which ones?
Farming. I don't get that. I don't understand that. I haven't heard. But what I will tell you is this. At the time, which is in the 70s. You're talking about the 70s.
Yeah.
60s, there was other things going on. There were other things going on there, because if you like, that was the time when the people who came were so busy just trying to feed themselves. They weren't organized. They were sending money back home. There was, the 70s was the time you're talking about. At that point, I was teaching in a mostly Black school in London. It was education priority area. What that means is that a minimum of 50% of the children are on free school meals. What that means is that at least 50% of them are extremely poor children.
Wow.
I was teaching 11 to 18-year-olds. Many of them, not most of them, but many of them were also going through the same trauma that I had done as a child, which is the people who came here to England. I'm talking about now from the Caribbean. I don't know every story of every minority. The people who came here, they didn't bring their children mostly. That's why I'm so unusual. That's why they're going to have to get me in when I'm 94, because there aren't many of us here. But anyway, They came by themselves because they came to work and their expectation was that they were going to go home. They were always going home. The conversation was always about going home, sending back money and
Okay,
going,
interesting.
right? So what they did was, and this is what happened to me, grandparents, aunts, whatever, looked after your children. And so very often what was happening, and this now relates to when I was working in the school, is that you would get young people coming at 11 or 14 or 16 from Jamaica, from wherever in the Caribbean. They had never really knew their parents. The parents had left so long ago that they didn't. And they were culturally, socially Caribbeans. And suddenly they were moved into London with parents who didn't know them, who had never been, who hadn't actually been parents for the last 5-10 years of their lives. And there was obviously trauma and a gap. That was very, very hard. A lot of those kids ended up in huge amounts of difficulties, as you might expect. Now, what you're talking about with the uprisings, I think, is this. So first of all, you've got the Brixton uprisings, and then you've got the New Cross fire. I'm not the expert on the Brixton uprisings, save to say there were a series of uprisings going on, and they were caused by police brutality. Many of my students were involved in that police brutality, and that police brutality was also involved or was around the kind of drugs trade, the illicit, particularly with dope, you know, with marijuana, and young Black men, young Black boys being stopped and searched and being fitted up as criminals and being roughed up. And
without warrants, it's important. Like just like the complaint about stop and frisk in the U.S. or carding in Canada, many of those police would just pick people out.
Yeah, we call it stop
them.
and search, but actually it's a way of harassing the Black population. So there was an extraordinary uprising in Brixton, which some of my community was very definitely involved in. But I also want to make it very clear at this point that if you were on the streets at that time in Brixton, it would have been very clear to you that it wasn't just a Black uprising. There were white people, disaffected white people on the streets as well. They never want to tell you that because they want to keep everybody in their separate little compartments. Now, the New Cross fire, the relevance of the New Cross fire. So New Cross is about, well, I can get in my car and be in New Cross in 5 minutes from here. I still live in the area where all this happened. 3 of my kids were in the New Cross fire. And there was a lot of disagreement in what happened. And yeah. I don't think this is the forum to go into that, you know, whether a firebomb was put inside the building, whether there was an accident, whatever. Let's just go over that bit, because I think what's more interesting is what happened after that, which is undeniable. I mean, there were, 20 young kids burnt to death during a party in the most harrowing circumstances. I'm certainly not going to go into some of the stories that came out of that.
Kind of like the Grenfell of its time.
It was the Grenfell of the time. Now, about a week before that, there had been a really bad fire in a house in Wales, family house where people had died. When that happened, the Queen had sent commiserations. Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister of the time, sent commiserations. Black kids died. There was silence. There was total silence. Most of these parents didn't even have the money to pay to bury their children. Literally did not have the money.
Wow.
There was no fundraising, there was no help, there was no acknowledgement in any way whatsoever. In fact, even now, if you go past, I went past it today, the site of the New Cross fire, there's no plaque, there's nothing that registers the fact that that event happened. But what that ignited in the Black community, which really hadn't been done before, was a political anger and a political aspiration. And that was basically the first organized Black demonstration. And a group of Black people marched, pointing out this awful, awful lack of equity in the way that our children were treated, and in the way that white children were. And I think that was the pivotal time. To me, that was the pivotal.
And what's interesting about the police brutality or state terror that you described, and is that there was a government investigation into how did we get to this point where we're having our Black British, where we're having Black British citizens, getting into fights with the police and so forth. And that government investigation found, obviously, they found that there was deep systemic racism. And of course, that led to the tragedy of the Stephen Lawrence case.
That's right.
Which also came to the same conclusion when there was a public inquiry into Stephen Lawrence, his racist killings, and the and lack of police efforts.
So I'm going to bring this round in a total circular thing, because what happened after that was what was called, from the Stephen Lawrence killing, was something that was called the Macpherson Principle. It's called the Macpherson Principle. Macpherson was the judge who led this inquiry. And what he said was, and he was talking very specifically, by the way, about the Black community. Basically, if somebody says, if somebody from the Black community says, I have been a victim of racism, then it needs to be investigated to see whether there was racism. It's called the Macpherson Principle. The irony of it, and it sends me absolutely crazy, in the last few years, the Zionist lobby have been using that in order to say, and here they twist the words, they say, if I say there's anti-Semitism, you can't say there isn't. And they quote the Macpherson Principle. Now, that isn't the Macpherson Principle, but, this is what they do. So they take something that was actually meant for oppressed people. And, you can say a lot of things about the white Jewish community in this country. You can say they're the targets of bigotry, that they are sometimes the targets of personal racism. What you can't say is that they are the targets of state racism,
exactly,
or of structural racism, or of police brutality, or of any other scale of disadvantage. Look at it. They are not disadvantaged educationally. They're not disadvantaged in the housing system, in the medical system. No way are they disadvantaged. But the Zionist lobby took this Macpherson principle and aligned it to themselves. So there you have, do you see how they co-opt something which was actually there literally to protect not just excluded, but oppressed minorities, and they weaponized it and they used it for themselves.
And before I get to this question, I'll just remind people about Stephen Lawrence. If they want more information, when Jackie first came on the program, she explained the Stephen Lawrence case, but I'll briefly explain it. He was a Black youth that was murdered by a racist gang, right? But what makes his case even more tragic is just the lack of police action in investigating it and so forth, which led to Okay, and go
Actually,
ahead and
no, no, no,
explain
no,
that.
no. I'm going to correct you there. It wasn't just the lack of. I mean, what has become clear in the ensuing years, it wasn't just a racism that meant they went, you know what, we can't be asked because he's black and we don't care. It was actual racism within the police force. So it wasn't, if you like, a passive racism that just said we can't be bothered. It was, if you like, an active racism. And that's what Macpherson was pointing towards. And a structural racism. That's what Macpherson was pointing towards.
That's a perfect segue to this question then, which is, before we talk about the huge protests that happened in year one of the COVID pandemic and in response to the murder of George Floyd, can you talk about the police state murder of Mark Duggan and the huge Brixton type of uprisings or riots, as some people like to call them, that took place in Brixton? And this was during the reign of terror of David Cameron and his conservative coalition government with the Liberal Democrats. And if you do remember the response of the press and the largely white left when it happened, can you talk about that? And yeah, and then from there we can talk about what happened with George.
I really don't want to talk about that very much because I wouldn't put myself out as an expert on that, really.
Okay.
So
okay, fair enough.
Yeah, it's not something I will never, if I don't feel I know enough about it, then I won't really speak about it.
Okay, no problem. Okay, but then let's talk about this, which is, can you talk about the protests in Britain then in response to the murder of George Floyd in the US? Talk to us about that, and also what I thought was quite interesting about the solidarity protests that took place in Britain was that the protests in Britain, the racial justice movement led by Black Britons and people of various immigrant backgrounds used the protest not just to speak out on American racism, but they used it as an opportunity to speak out on white supremacy in Britain. Can you talk? Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, of course. Not surprising, because I think if, I'm going to say something now about Black people, which they used to say about Jews, and it was something that was used against Jews in a very anti-Semitic way. I mean, Black people are a transnational community. The fact that I have got relatives in Jamaica and also in America, as well as in the UK, this is not unusual. We're a transnational community. So, when something like Floyd happens, I'm talking to my sister and my nieces and my nephews about it. This is not something 2,500, 4,000 miles away. This is still happening to my community. We are a transnational community. So
Africanism, yeah.
So first of all, there's that. The second is that we had seen these tactics being used at home. And of course, and you have to be very careful how you put this, because, people have slightly complained about the way this has been put. But of course, there is a lot of co-training and support between Israel and the police forces of both the UK and of Israel. And, Israel is not embarrassed about this. They're proud of it. They also do a lot of the equipping. We all know that they practice first on the Palestinians, and then our police buy it, and then they use it on the Black people. That's also another.
And Israel also does this towards their own Black Israeli population.
Of course. So, Black people aren't stupid. They have seen this before. I mean, somebody said to me the other day, we were looking at the alleged 250,000 people on this pro-Israel march in Washington. I mean, it's ridiculous. It was obviously not 250,000, but let's just give it to them. Let's just say they had their paltry 250,000 there, all waving their little blue and white flags. What was it that was really obvious about this was the sea of white faces. The sea of white faces, apart from the black guy on the platform. Apart from the black guy who was on
Van Jones, who when he talked about like we need peace, we need
yeah.
we
That,
need
I
peace.
mean,
I don't want to see killings on both
yeah, but
sides.
he
People were
didn't,
shouting, "No ceasefire! No
yeah, he
ceasefire!"
didn't get the script right, did he? He didn't get the script right because he
I
was
said,
calling for
I said on Instagram, and a shout out to Ronnie Akalik of Breakthrough News because she liked this. I said, dude, the guy's at is at a completely wrong march. He should be going to the Palestine Solidarity once, demanding BDS, and then people will be saying ceasefire now.
He's seen the signpost and he took the right and he meant to take the left and he found himself in the front of this like Ku Klux Klan sort of rally where they've got, who's that mad preacher guy, evangelical guy who thinks it's the second coming and has said all those really anti-Semitic things about Jews. He was on it as well. I mean, if I was him, I'd be going, oh no, this is a nightmare. Who booked me in for this?
But that's what's so bizarre about the whole progressive, liberal, socialist on everything except Palestine, or what I like to call, because Van Jones is a bit like David Lammy in many ways, or Chaka Amun, and always like propping up the establishment, or they're what I call the regressive on everything, especially Palestine. But going back to the George Floyd protests, I thought it was very great that you had people in Brixton and similar countries with large Black populations saying, okay, let's not use this to just bash American racism. We have to use this as an opportunity to talk about institutional anti-Black racism, xenophobia, Romophobia, and police brutality in this country.
The reason we're in European countries is because of the transatlantic nature of globalization. Of course, we're going to see those connections. I mean, that's what we're here for. Jamaican people, Caribbean people are totally culturally and materially the product of European capitalism. We are the bastard offspring of European capitalism. So, of course, it's not just a triangular trade, and it don't just go one way. It goes all ways. And so we're here.
But what's also incredible isn't your Black Lives Matter, which I believe it works with some of the Black Lives Matter organizations in the U.S. But what's unique about the Black Lives Matter in Britain aren't they explicitly Marxist and anti-imperialist, or at least or at least they say they stand in solidarity with all oppressed Black people globally.
I mean, how could you not be? And I mean, even if you don't know you're
because Jackie, if I may interrupt, you'd be surprised, but there are some Black Lives Matter organizations that don't give a shit about what's going on in Africa, and don't give a shit about the suffering of indigenous people and other people.
They're just joshing you. They're trying to get an easy buck. They know that that's bullshit. I mean, honestly, you have to go through so many convoluted ways of thinking to not actually see the kinship between your own position in terms of where we're at here and what's going on to the Palestinians. What's going on with the Palestinians is what happened to the Native American people, for God's sake, 150 years ago.
Well, it's still ongoing.
And still ongoing. And you have to be willfully stupid, and they're not willfully stupid. But I mean, I think a lot of people, I'm being serious now, it's bloody hard to admit the truth. It's no fun. You're going to lose your job. You're not going to make friends. You're not going to be invited on TV, mate. They might be invited on your show, They're not going
Yeah.
to be invited on the BBC for talking this load of nonsense, are
Or
they?
Channel 4 or even The
Or
Guardian for
Channel
that
4.
matter.
Oh yeah, come on, of course they know this. Of course they know this. And if they don't, well, there is a sort of willful blindness that I think goes on in oppressed communities. Actually, it's not willful, it's
Well, there's
functional.
even there's even the issue of colorism that does exist
Yeah,
within within South Asian communities, Black communities, and whatnot.
it's
So
functional, because it's damn hard being Black. I am so bored of being Black. I've decided next week I'm going to be white for just for a week. I'm just going to be white. I'm just going to dominate the space I'm in. I'm just going to pretend I can't see any racism at all. I'm just going to have a week off. You know?
I completely reject that, and I also don't like when I hear Black Americans. I really detest when I hear Black Americans say that we're only focusing on people of people Africans who are descendants of slaves, and we just want to focus on that reparations and not you know the larger African Holocaust of colonialism, and stuff like that. And it gets under my skin when I hear when I sometimes ask, not just Black leftists, but all leftists, particularly from the United States, what's it going to take for us to show more solidarity to the plight of indigenous Americans from the mainland to Hawaii and Alaska and so
Yeah.
forth. And a lot of them say, well, some of those Native Americans had slaves, ergo, I'm not going to show them any solidarity until they give us reparations. And when was the last time they showed up to our rallies? To which I have to literally bite my tongue and
Yeah, well, I'm not talking to those people. They just need some re-education in a very small room for a little while, and I'll talk to them after that.
perfect segue to this question. I want to return to what you said about the white left and your optimism about the white left nowadays compared to before, which is, can you speak to the difficulty Black people have in the UK in finding their voice to speak out on racism and the issue of white socialist Marxists engaging in class reductionism? Because with Brexit, we see the rise, well, not the rise, but we see a new advancement of the new far right and fake populist media like GB News
Yeah.
spiked online, and a lot of white socialist Marxists shifting to the right. And I'm curious your reflections on this, but talk about how it seems in the UK sometimes it seems as if it's worse in terms of Black people being voiceless in the UK and talking about white supremacy in the UK as opposed to Brits America or Canada for for that matter.
I mean, I don't know about Canada, and like I said, I don't really want to talk about what I don't know enough about. But I do know that when I go to the States, there's part of me that feels quite envious about the position of Black people in the States. And, that to me, that's about the fact that, there are so many differences, one of which is that the Black population in America have been there for much, much longer in the way that they are now than we have. I mean, there have been Black people in the UK since Roman times, but what's happened, like I mentioned before, is that, very often those communities were integrated and kind of melded into the general population. In America, you've got a different thing. You've also got the fact that the fight for emancipation happened, the civil rights movement happened, and we'd have to talk about what all sorts of complications there from what I just said, but it happened in that soil. There's no doubt about it. It happened in that soil. You've got a much higher percentage of university educated and middle class and rich Black people in the States, and it makes a bloody difference. We don't have.
In fact, I often say this, and it doesn't get me, it doesn't get me any popular, it doesn't make me win the popularity contest. But I do sometimes say when I'm in spaces filled with Black Americans that yes, it does suck to be Black in the U.S. because of white supremacy and all that stuff, but our suffering is still a five-star hotel compared to what Native Americans, Indigenous Americans have to suffer. And I would say the exact same thing if I was in a room filled with Latinos, Latinas, Latinx, some who are Black, Afro Latinas and whatnot.
Just a simple thing. Just let's get just to a simple thing. If you're in America, you can do what my mother did and go to a Black university. If that's your choice, you can do that. You can go to a city, and there's a number of cities now which basically have Black administrations and a majority Black. I can't do that here. The level of development for Black people and the choice that gives you and the opportunities that gives you is just massive. And it makes a huge and lot of difference. And there's also a form of imperialism, American imperialism, that happens. So that, in the UK, all our stories of Blackness come from America. And Black Americans haven't got a clue of the different story that we have. We have a different story. And it's a very interesting, people of the Caribbean who come to the UK, it's a very interesting story and it's a very important one. But, mostly I find American Blacks in that way are often as sort of imperialist as their white, co-citizens. In that, if I say to my sister, for example, well, you see things like that, but it's different in England. She doesn't even really want to give too much space to what I'm talking about, which is a shame because it informs us a lot about how racism actually works.
But I completely agree with what you. I completely agree with what you said, and I wasn't even going to bring this up, but I think we should bring this up because you have this bizarre thing that's happening where Black British actors have to go to the U.S. to get to get a job, and they're playing Martin Luther King Jr. or they're playing American gangsters, or they're just playing in or they're playing a biracial couple, couple.
That's the point.
And right now, you're starting to see a growing trend of Black Americans being very pissed off about that. And I'm of the opinion that, that those Black British actors and screenwriters and those who now are rock stars like Idris Elba and so forth, or somebody like Steve McQueen, they should be fighting to have the Black British stories in Britain told and so forth.
Well, the problem is you can say that, and I've talked to some of those people about it, and you can say that and you can be right. The problem is there's no good fighting for it if it just doesn't bloody happen. It just doesn't bloody happen because we don't have people commissioning the work who are Black. That's the difference in terms of what's happening in the UK and the US. We don't have that kind of insertion into the echelons of power or of creativity. So we're allowed to be creative in very limited spheres, and we're allowed to be successful in very limited spheres. But like you say, I mean, Britain produces some extraordinarily talented, creative Black voices, and they have to go elsewhere. And I'm not going to blame anybody for doing that at all. Look, I'm going to do this. I'm going to give you another 10 minutes and then I'm going to have to go.
All
I
right,
think,
no problem. Well, then
however
okay.
much I'm enjoying it, I'm getting knackered now.
Okay, well then I have to. Okay, well then I have to ask this question. We're
And
uh,
you've got a lot of good material as well. So, you
you
know,
are giving me a lot of good material, so I have to ask this question. This kind of goes back to the issue we have with our white socialist and white Marxist friends. When you
okay.
hear people complain about wokeness, or often white leftists complaining about identity politics, which to me it's clear more and more when you dissect it's dog whistle, it's code for I don't want to address white supremacy, I don't want to address patriarchy, and I most certainly do not want to talk about heteronormativity, and don't you dare talk to me about solidarity for trans people. What's your response to this, and how do we overcome it? Because we do see a lot of white leftists who are going on right-wing populist outlets like Spiked Online and GB News to complain about too much identity politics, too much wokeism. So your response to that?
Okay, so I'm going to ignore the wokeism thing because that's just trash, and it's not even worthy of me responding to wokeism, or, you know, like wokeism. But I will say something about identity politics, because I have to tell you that I'm sick to death of identity politics. I am sick to death of it being called identity. I want to go back to it being called race and racism, right? And I think all the other issues around gender and sexuality, etc., need, you know, identity politics has actually been co-opted by the right, whether it's the right of the left or the right of the right. And that's why I think we need to get away from it, because what's happened is, if we start talking about identity, it atomizes us into our particular little, you know, this is me, this is my identity, I'm Jewish, I'm black, I'm a woman, I'm heteronormative, you know, whatever it is. I think we've got to reject that. Let's go back to talking about race and power and powerlessness and powerfulness. So I'm sort of with them, but not in the way that you expect. I don't want to be talking about my identity unless I'm talking in a very personal way. If I'm talking politically, I want to be talking about race. I want to be talking about power and who has it and who doesn't have it. And identity politics has become a way, I think, of emptying out notions of power and allowing us to say, oh, that hurt me. You know, when you said that, oh my God, I was so hurt by that. I don't give a monkey's, to some extent, about hurt, right? What I care about is power and who has it and who doesn't have it.
Before we end the program, we usually do the questionnaire done by Marcel Proust, later modernized by French broadcaster Bernard Pivot, later adopted by my hero, the late great James Lipton of Inside the Actors Studio. Jackie, before I let you go, it's your turn to do this, so here it goes. Jackie, what is your favorite words?
Affluence.
What is your least favorite words?
Oh my God. My least favorite word. I'm going to have to come back to that. You see, you're asking me something. I don't really have I love words. I love all words. So I don't have a least favorite word.
But in that case, what sound or noise do you love, followed by what sound or noise do you dislike?
Oh my God. I can't stand people eating crisps. It's got to stop. People
Wait,
eating
actual like fries or actual like chips? Like
you know, the crisp, we call them potato, you call them potato chips.
yeah.
Got to stop. Nobody can eat that and make a crackle sound. And particularly, I can't stand it when you go into cinemas and do that, right? There's going to be murder next time I have to cope with that.
It's so noisy that I don't even try to watch movies anymore while eating them.
Exactly.
But then what sound or noise do you love then?
Oh, music.
Fantastic. Then what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally slash psychologically?
Yoga.
What turns you off then?
Oh, being too hot. Don't
Okay, all right. Then you must love living in England then, because it never gets too hot.
and my nice thick jumpers, you see.
What's your favorite curse word?
Oh, bollocks.
What profession would you love to do if you weren't doing all the great activism and you are also the author of a book and you've done a one-woman show. So if you weren't doing any of that, what profession would you love to do?
You know what I'd like to be? I'd like to be a backing singer.
Backing singer.
Yeah.
Awesome. We'll work on that. And then what profession would you absolutely not want to do under any circumstances?
Oh, now that's a hard one, isn't it? I I I don't think I would have any time to be an accountant. I think
Yeah, 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 yeah.
that would that would kill me.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say as you arrive at the pearly gates, or whatever is your vision of the afterlife? And even if you're an atheist, please do answer the question.
You know what my vision of an afterlife would be? And I don't know if any of your audience partake. It would be like being at a forever festival, but when there's no garbage and the food is free, and you're just meeting one friend or one good person after another, and you're just having a day, and then you have another day, and then you go and listen to this music, and then you have a dance and more dancing. Heaven to me would be a whole big festival.
Well, we were joined on this edition of One Plus One with our returning champion, Jackie Walker, longtime social racial justice activist, anti imperialist, anti war activist, an author, retired teacher, Jewish anti Zionist campaigner. She co founded Momentum, a pro Corbyn socialist, blah, 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 blah. Co-host and co-founder of Redline TV. And folks, do check that out and become a Patreon and donate generously. And once I have my own donations page, don't worry, Jackie, you will also be paid very generously for all the times you've been here. Also co-founder of Labor Against the Witch Hunt in Exile. Miss Jackie Walker, thank you so much for taking the time out to come here. It's been a real honor to talk to you again, and please let's not wait 2 more years for you to come back, okay?
Oh, better not, because I might be dead in 2 more years' time, mate. Anyway, okay.